Chilean Miners, August 5th, 2010. The San Jose copper and gold mine in the Atacama Desert, Chile. It was supposed to be just another shift for the 33 miners working deep underground. Among them were 54-year-old shift foreman Luis Urzua and 19-year-old Jimmy Sanchez, the youngest of the group. The mine stretched over 2,300 feet beneath the surface, roughly the height of two Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. The air was hot and humid, thick with dust. The only sounds were the rhythmic clang of pickaxes, the rumble of machinery, and the occasional shout between workers echoing through the narrow tunnels. At 2 p.m., without warning, the mountain moved. A massive slab of rock estimated at 700,000 tons, twice the weight of the Empire State Building, broke free from the ceiling and came crashing down. The sound was deafening, like thunder trapped underground. The collapse blocked the main ramp, the only vehicle exit from the mine. Dust exploded through the tunnels, choking out visibility. The miners, scattered across different levels, felt the ground shake violently beneath their feet. Some were thrown to the ground, others clung to the walls, terrified the entire mine would collapse on top of them. When the dust finally settled, the reality set in. They were trapped, all 33 of them, 2,300 feet underground with no way out. The miners retreated to a small refuge chamber, about 540 square feet, barely the size of a small apartment. It was designed to hold 10 people for 48 hours. Now it had to shelter 33 men, for who knows how long. The emergency supplies were scarce: a few bottles of water, some canned tuna, condensed milk, and crackers. If rationed carefully, maybe enough for 2 days. Maybe. The temperature hovered around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, the humidity made breathing difficult, and the darkness was absolute beyond the feeble glow of their helmet lamps. Above ground, families gathered at the mine entrance, desperate for news. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but when they saw the scale of the collapse, their faces went pale. One rescue coordinator whispered to another, "If they're alive down there, it's a miracle. Getting them out, that might take a miracle too." Days turned into weeks. Above ground, drill teams worked around the clock, sending probe after probe into the earth, searching for any sign of life. Drill number 8 was their 17th attempt. On August 22nd, 17 days after the collapse, the drill finally broke through into the refuge. When they pulled it back up, something was attached to the tip, a plastic bag, and inside, a handwritten note in red marker. It read, "Estamos bien en el refugio, los 33. We are well in the refuge, the 33. The rescue team erupted in cheers. Against all odds, all 33 miners were still alive. But being alive and getting out were two very different things. The rescue plan was audacious. They would drill a rescue shaft 28 inches in diameter, straight down through 2,300 feet of solid rock. Then, they'd lower a specially designed capsule, nicknamed Phoenix, the Phoenix, to bring the miners up one at a time. The drilling took 55 days. Every day, the miners grew weaker. They were on strict rations: 2 spoonfuls of tuna, a sip of milk, and a morsel of crackers every 48 hours per person. Some lost over 20 pounds. The psychological toll was just as brutal. Fights broke out. Men broke down crying in the darkness. But Luis Urzua, the shift foreman, kept them together. He organized them into work shifts, exercise routines, even set up a makeshift infirmary. Finally, on October 12th, 69 days after the collapse, the Phoenix capsule was ready. One by one, each miner was strapped into the narrow metal tube and pulled up through the shaft. The journey took 15 agonizing minutes per person. The capsule scraped against the rock walls, spinning slowly as it ascended. At 12:11 a.m. on October 13th, Florencio Avalos became the first miner to reach the surface. As he emerged from the capsule, he fell into his son's arms, weeping. The rescue continued nonstop for over 22 hours. Miner after miner emerged, blinking in the lights, some laughing, some crying, all of them alive. Luis Urzua, the foreman, was the last man out, insisting on making sure every single one of his crew made it to safety first. When he finally stepped out of the Phoenix at 9:55 p.m. on October 13th, he saluted the rescue team and said simply, "We have completed our mission." All 33 miners survived. Against impossible odds, they had cheated death itself. Quecreek mine flood. July 24th, 2002. Somerset County, Pennsylvania. 9 coal miners were working the night shift at the Quecreek mine, cutting through a coal seam about 240 feet underground. The crew included 56-year-old Randy Fogel and 49-year-old Thomas Foy, both veterans with decades of mining experience. The mine was cold and damp, the air heavy with the smell of coal dust and diesel fumes from the machinery. They'd been working for hours, their coal-cutting machine chewing steadily through the black rock face, when suddenly the machine's blade punched through into something it shouldn't have: water. An abandoned mine from the 1950s filled with over 50 million gallons of water sat just on the other side of that wall, and their maps were wrong. The moment the blade broke through, water exploded into the mine shaft with the force of a freight train. The miners had seconds to react. The initial blast knocked men off their feet, sending equipment tumbling. Within minutes, water was pouring in at an estimated 20,000 gallons per minute. The crew scrambled uphill, away from the deluge, their headlamps cutting through the spray and darkness. But the water was rising faster than they could climb. They made it to a small air pocket about 30 feet higher, but there was nowhere else to go. The water kept coming. The 9 men huddled together in the freezing water, which had risen to their chests. The temperature of the water was around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia within hours. They tied themselves together with a cable, reasoning that if they were going to die, at least their bodies would be found together so their families would know what happened. They took turns pounding on the roof with a hammer, 9 strikes, a pause, 9 more strikes, over and over, a desperate SOS, hoping someone above might hear. As hours passed, the cold seeped into their bones. Some men started shivering uncontrollably. Others went quiet, their movements sluggish. Above ground, rescue teams had been alerted when the miners didn't check in. When they realized what had happened, they knew time was critical. The rescue plan was unprecedented. They would drill a 6-inch air shaft first to pump warm air down and slow the hypothermia. Then they'd drill a 30-inch rescue shaft to pull the miners out. But there was a problem. The drills kept hitting rock formations that slowed progress to a crawl. Meanwhile, engineers worked on pumping out the water, but it was a race they were losing. For every gallon they pumped out, 3 more flooded in. After 55 hours trapped in the dark, cold water, the miners heard the most beautiful sound of their lives: the grinding of a drill bit breaking through the ceiling above them. Warm air rushed in. Then, a voice through a communication pipe: "Hang on, boys. We're coming to get you." It took another 22 hours to complete the rescue shaft. When the capsule finally descended, they sent the weakest men up first. Randy Fogel, who could barely stand from the cold, was pulled to the surface after 77 hours underground. One by one, they all came up. On July 28th at 2:45 a.m., the last miner emerged. They were suffering from severe hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion, but they were alive. All 9 of them. Against the rising water, the cold, and the darkness, they had survived. When asked how they made it, Thomas Foy said simply, "We prayed and we never gave up on each other." The cable they had used to tie themselves together was later displayed in a museum, a testament to the bond that kept them alive. Beaconsfield mine collapse. April 25, 2006. Beaconsfield, Tasmania, Australia. The Beaconsfield gold mine was one of the richest gold deposits in Australia, but it was also old and unstable. That night, 17 miners were working various levels of the mine. Among them were 37-year-old Brant Webb and 35-year-old Todd Russell, working together about 3,000 feet underground, nearly a kilometer beneath the Earth's surface. The tunnels were narrow, barely wide enough for a man to walk through, and the rock walls glistened with moisture. The only light came from their helmet lamps, casting long shadows that danced across the jagged walls. At 9:26 p.m., a seismic event, registering 2.2 on the Richter scale, essentially a small earthquake, rocked the mine. But underground, it felt like the entire world was ending. The earthquake triggered a massive rockfall. Tons of rock and debris came crashing down, collapsing tunnels and trapping miners across multiple levels. Brant and Todd were in a small cage, a metal work platform, when the collapse hit. A boulder the size of a small car smashed down inches from Todd's head. Rock poured in from all sides, burying the cage. When the shaking finally stopped, they were entombed, trapped in a space barely 5 feet by 5 feet with thousands of tons of rock on every side. And they could hear water. Slowly dripping, then flowing. The chamber was flooding. Of the 17 miners, 1 man, 44-year-old Larry Knight, was killed instantly in the collapse. The other 14 made it to safety, but Brant and Todd were missing. Rescue teams couldn't locate them. For 5 agonizing days, there was no sign of life. Families held vigils at the mine entrance, fearing the worst. Then, on April 30th, 5 days after the collapse, rescue workers were clearing debris when they heard something. Tapping. Rhythmic tapping on a metal pipe. They tapped back. And from deep underground, a response. 2 taps. Brant and Todd were alive. But their situation was dire. They were trapped in a tiny chamber surrounded by unstable rock. Any wrong move, any vibration could trigger another collapse and bury them completely. The water had risen to their knees and was still coming. They had no food, only water dripping from the walls to drink. Hypothermia was setting in. The rescue was incredibly delicate. Engineers couldn't use explosives or heavy machinery. The vibrations would trigger another collapse. Instead, they had to hand dig, carefully removing rock piece by piece. It was painstakingly slow. While they worked, they drilled a small hole to the trapped miners and lowered supplies, water, food, iPods with music to keep their spirits up, even letters from their families. Brant and Todd, cramped in their tiny space, tried to stay positive. They told jokes. They talked about their kids, their wives, what they'd do when they got out. But as days turned into weeks, the mental strain became unbearable. The darkness, the cold, the constant fear that the rock above might shift at any moment, it wore them down. Todd later said there were moments he thought about giving up, but Brant would start talking again, keep him focused, keep him fighting. After 14 days of digging, on May 9th, rescuers finally broke through. The hole was just big enough for a man to crawl through. Brant Webb was the first to crawl through. Emerging after 14 days and 19 hours underground, he was gaunt, his face covered in dirt, but he was smiling. Todd Russell followed minutes later. When they reached the surface, they hugged their families, tears streaming down their faces. Both men had lost significant weight and were suffering from dehydration and minor injuries, but they were alive. The rescue had taken 2 weeks of nonstop effort from dozens of workers who refused to give up. When asked what kept him going, Brant said, "I had 2 choices, give up and die, or fight and live. I chose to fight." The Beaconsfield mine never reopened. Today, a memorial stands at the entrance, honoring Larry Knight, the man who didn't make it out, and celebrating the miracle of the 2 who did. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button for more. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.